What's up, guys? It's John, and I wanted to go into our Sunday games, and I think we have a lot of good narrative games kind of coming up. And I think it's going to be no coincidence through the year that happens. Uh, as far as Thursday, we had a really good day actually. I actually thought I was going. I took an exact score just for giggles, put a little bit on it. 24-7 was my actual prediction. Unfortunately, that missed, but we came really close as far as basically what was going to happen this game. Again, I thought we might get a defensive touchdown. I actually had a really strong hunch we would. But we got like 7 sacks, so basically making the Jets look like a very unstoppable defense, which isn't much against the Patriots offense. But I do think as the year goes on, we're going to see the Jets defense. Probably, I think they might be the best defense in the NFL this year, just based off the way that they portray them. So yeah, not much of a shock there. I figured it'd be a pretty decisive win. So, Chargers Steelers. I love the Chargers just because I think they're going to continue the Harbaugh's narrative for both brothers, which I'll get into in a second. You probably already know, but I think Jim's going to win, go to 3-0. And again, I think they got Fields started now, so at some point I think they're going to have discussions if they're going to start Russell or if they're going to start Fields. And I don't know, I don't see the Steelers having some crazy record this year. If anything, it would make sense for the Chargers because of Jim. You know, he's been the narrative all off season, so probably an under here. Just because it's so low, probably going to be a lot of field goals. So yeah, I like the Chargers to win on the money line here. Texans Vikings. This is a weird one. Even though it seems kind of like a trap, I am gonna say Texans cover. They have CJ as like an odds-on favorite to win the MVP, and Minnesota last year had a horrible year. They didn't do much. Of course, they got Jefferson back. He was hurt for a lot of last year, but I just don't think they're pushing them, especially with Caleb in the division now. So more people might be on the Texans. I'm not going to deny that. But there's a lot of games where, again, there's not going to be as much money. And there's a lot more appealing games than this, so it's probably not going to be a huge liability either way. And Minnesota is at home. They have looked pretty good. So public might be 60-40 on the Texans, but I'm going to go with the Texans for the narrative. I think they'll cover. They might even be the last undefeated team. They have them looking pretty good. And again, CJ's not just going to start looking like crap. So I think CJ gets the win here on the road. So I'll take the Texans -2. I'll take the Saints -2.5. I like the narrative. They beat the Cowboys and beat the Eagles back-to-back weeks would be pretty impressive. And I think more people are going to be on Philly, even though Philly hasn't looked great. Last week we faded them, and it worked out with the Falcons. So public again might be a little more on. I think the public's still going to be more on the Eagles, even if they haven't had a great start. I think the Saints are going to have to get a few more wins before the public starts taking them. So I like the Saints here -2.5. I like the Broncos to cover the 6. They've just been awful this year. An upset wouldn't surprise me, but I do think they're going to have the worst record in the entire NFL. I just have a feeling. I don't think it's going to be the Panthers again, and I don't think it's going to be even the Giants. I think the Giants will probably get a couple wins, maybe some upsets. As far as the Broncos, they just have nothing going for them, but they have, I believe, some of them like as far as the team's worth. I think it's like one of the highest in the league, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they have big things planned for them, which would probably include the first overall pick. So I like I think they're going to have the worst year this year, but I think they'll find a way to cover this spread. Especially after last week, I think people were fine to take the Bucks for a touchdown when they beat the Lions pretty decisively. You got Baker looking like a maniac. So I think, again, Bucks probably eke it out. I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos won. I don't think they're going to lose every game this year, but I do think they're going to have the worst record in football. But to me, it seems kind of like maybe a clip. Maybe a 4 point game even. So Broncos plus 6 in my play there. Again, kind of like a parlay crusher. I think a lot of people are just going to have the Bucks straight up, or even giving up the 6, and that's one where I can see Vegas really sticking it to the people by having the Broncos cover. Packers, Lions, or Titans. Sorry, I like the Titans for a few reasons. I like them to cover. More people should be on Green Bay. The Titans have been pretty bad this year, and more importantly, I think that, again, they're going to keep the entire NFC North very close. Outside, maybe even the Lions are close this year. Like, I really think to make it where, again, the Bears have stakes down the road. So when we have Caleb versus Love, and even Caleb versus the Lions, there's some stakes to it. And maybe that's why Minnesota's off to a 2-0 start, things like that. So I think, the whole for the NFC, it's going to be mostly Caleb. I think for the AFC, a lot of it's going to be, Rodgers, obviously, but also Harbaugh. So there's going to be stories going on. And again, if the Bears are out of contention by week 10, that's when they play the Packers. Doesn't make much sense, in my opinion. So I think, again, the Packers probably not going to have a great record this year. Right around 500 for them and the Bears, in my opinion. So I'll take the Titans here, -3. Again, it also looks like a trap. Giants, Browns here. 6.5. I like the Browns to cover this. Again, I don't think the Giants are going to do great either. We did take them last week as a possible, it wasn't really an upset, but against the Commanders. And I go into the field goals and how blatant it is. I think that was the game where there was, 15 field goals? 21-18. I think it was all field goals. And, nobody bats an eye. It's crazy. But, yeah, I just think the 6.5 is a little heavy. And I think more people might be looking at the possible upset value for the Giants. So I like the Browns here to cover that 6.5. Bears, Colts, I like the Bears. Again, I think they're going to get, in games like this, I feel like they're going to get them just so they can establish that as long as their defense holds it down, Caleb's doing enough to win. At least against certain teams like the Texans, it wasn't enough. They got the cover, of course, but not the win. And also, between Caleb and Richardson, I think they want to establish Caleb. So I think Bears win this. It's going to be a good rivalry game. Probably a good bit of money on this game, too. So maybe expect a lot of shenanigans. But yeah, I think Caleb gets the win. Bears move to 2-1. Again, they finished last season with one of the best records. And I don't mean finished, but the last 8 weeks of the season, something like that. Because I remember noting it was right when CM Punk returned. And obviously, CM Punk is the biggest draw in Chicago history, and I am including Michael Jordan. If you don't believe me, just listen to any time this man comes to a wrestling event in Chicago. It's absolutely insane. But no, even if you say Michael's ahead of Punk, he's the biggest draw that Chicago's had in 30, 40 years, and it's just because, again, there's really been, in my opinion, nobody up until Caleb, and even he's not close yet, that can draw like CM Punk. But the Bears finally have a draw. But it was interesting, yeah. Punk returned, and that they won. I think they won, and I thought maybe the Bears would start losing, just because Punk was a focus. But they started winning, so I wonder if that wasn't a coincidence. I think they finished 5-3 or 6-2 over the last several games of the season, and it was right with Punk returning. He returned in November. And yeah, this one all has happened. So I found that interesting at the time. So starting the year off 2-1 would make sense in my opinion. So I got the Bears. Here I like the Panthers for the cover. It is kind of heavy for a crappy Raiders team. But they just beat the Ravens. They're at home. And I think it will establish that Bryce is a bust. Some guys just bust for whatever reason. Maybe he didn't sell his soul. I don't know. But they're going to make a point of it in my opinion. And a Dalton win would not surprise me in the least. And then they could really run the narrative already. Biggest is he the biggest bust of all time? Which of course he's not. I think you can't be bigger than Jamarcus Russell just because of that story. Here's a guy who held out, got at the time I think a max contract, maybe even more than a max. I think he got the biggest at that point ever, biggest guaranteed. and then he shows up like 40 pounds overweight. He's like 300 pounds to training camp. So like, yeah, I don't think Bryce is that bad or as bad as some of the other busts, but he's gonna be. They want stories, they want narratives. So calling him a bust seems like they're already getting ahead of it. So I feel like the Raiders, while they should beat him pretty bad, obviously, I wouldn't be surprised if they lost this game. But I'm just gonna take the Panthers for the cover because even a close game, they can argue they looked better than they ever did with Bryce. Dolphins are going to be a hard read this year, but I like the Seahawks -4.5. I think the Dolphins might be basement dwellers. Maybe not as bad as the Patriots, but just because they pulled the rug on Tua, I think they're going to need a year or two before they get a marketable quarterback, or if they do wind up going with Tua, we'll find out, I guess. But I just think there's not much of a story with this team this year. The Seahawks are always pretty competitive. They're just kind of established that way. And again, 4.5. I wouldn't say it's heavy, but I don't think people are going to be running to take that. I think they're still looking at the Dolphins as a decent team, and plus 180 against the Seahawks might look appealing. So I do like the Seahawks to cover the 4.5. I like the Cowboys here, so it's going to be a money line pick because I do like the Harbros narrative. They did it in the first week, they did it in the second week, and again, there was only 1-0 and 0-1. It wasn't like some crazy coincidence, but they're kind of running it that way. And then after it was 2-0 and 0-2, they ran it again. So I think they do it. I think they triple down. I think Jim starts off 3-0 and John starts off 0-3. So I'm gonna go with the Cowboys on this one. This one's an interesting one, and it makes me think if I'm right about the entire NFC North being very close this year. This line makes no sense to me. I get they had a bad week, and I get the Cardinals are slightly improved, but this team was just to the NFC Championship, and they were ahead of the Niners. Weren't they up by 2 touchdowns that game or something? They're stacked offensively. Their defense is really good, and they're only laying 3 against the Cardinals. It makes no sense to me. Actually, I like the Cardinals to win this outright, if I'm being honest. Just because of, again, I think the Lions are going to get their wins. So this would be an unexpected one for a lot of people. And I could take the 3, but I think the value is with the win straight up, honestly. I think, honestly, if the Lions were to win, they'll probably cover the 3. So I just have a feeling. I don't see them just winning by like 2 points. I think they're either going to win handedly or not win at all, and that's what I'm going with. I don't think they'll win at all. I think the Cardinals get a win, and maybe they'll be a surprise team out of the NFC this year. Then maybe the Bears, a few others. Niners, Rams here. I'm liking the Niners -6.5. Coming off the loss. Minnesota's not much better than the Rams. They're both, if we're going off last year and really who was added to each team, who each team lost, I don't see the Rams that much better than the Vikings. So 6.5 at home. I think more people are gonna be on the Rams. It makes sense to me. So I like the Niners here to cover the 6.5. Kind of get back on track. When they win, they tend to, and I think they're going to continue to basically dog walk their opponents. And I don't think tomorrow will be any different. So I expect a big game. Maybe Brock has a big blowout game. Some of the receivers get going. Obviously, Ben Ayuk was a huge talking point this offseason. A lot of things like that. So curious what they're saying, anything. So we got injuries on both sides. I think McCaffrey, is he still out? So Debo's not playing. So that makes it even more interesting that they're giving up a touchdown without Debo or Kittle. And 2 of their best defenders are questionable. They'll probably play. But yeah, this doesn't make sense at all to me, honestly. It makes me like the Niners even more. I don't think they should be giving up 6.5 with, again, like arguably 4 of their best players injured. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I love the -6.5 here. And we're going to go with Kirk Chains Cousins here to win. I think at the very least they will cover. So the Chiefs could eke one out. I think they did that already this year with the Bengals. Obviously, they won but didn't cover. And I thought in week one, I could be wrong. I thought they won and didn't cover. But I think as far as this game, they, I think they're going to really make Robinson the X factor. If I'm not, if I know anything about the way they push players. So he's had a modest first 2 weeks. I think he's going to get more carries than he's averaging 16 a game. I think he'll get over 20 carries this game. I think he's going to get a lot of screens, flat routes, and just passing routes in general. I think he definitely gets at least a touchdown. I think he's going to go nuts, to be quite honest. And then again, they can build him up by saying he ran all over the defending champs, who had, I think, a top 5 defense last year. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. The line doesn't make any sense at all. I get they're at home, but again, you're talking about 2-time Super Bowl champs, defending Super Bowl champs, against a team that can't even get into the playoffs. And Cousins really isn't that good. Like, they really do seem to like this guy. They really treat him up there with like the elite quarterbacks, when I don't think, from a real or scripted perspective, he is. But yeah, I think you see the Chiefs winning at the very end of games. So again, they could get a last-minute win but not cover. But I'm going to take the Falcons to win. I think on prime time they'll have Kirk Chain's cousin look really good. As well as, again, I think Robinson's going to be the guy who really just goes absolutely nuts. And again, they're kind of starting Mahomes off a little stumbly here, where, arguably, like, through I think they said last week was the worst game of his career, that he played the whole game, as far as like passing yards, stuff like that. So maybe they continue that narrative. And again, I think Robinson's going to be the big factor here. So yeah, we got a few upsets. I think the Falcons are going to win outright. And then we got 2 Monday night games, so we'll go into them tomorrow. Jags, Bills, always a rough read with the Jags. It's really weird to see what they're doing with them. And then Commanders, Bengals here. This could be a game where the Bengals really establish themselves. They could start them off 0-3 too, which would be interesting. Again, another reason I think it's good to pick this one tomorrow, because if the Ravens do indeed go to 0-3, I don't think they're going to do it with the Bengals too. Just my opinion. Maybe they do. But I would think they would probably... They usually don't have 2 teams like that, where they're both probably going to be playoff teams, starting off 0-3. So, although the Bengals, I think... I think they did win in the 3rd week last year. I thought last year they started off 0-3, and not that long ago I think they started off with a pretty bad record, and then Burrow won like 7 straight or something like that, and then they got in the playoffs. So they can maybe try and run that narrative again. Like I said, once we see what happens with the Ravens, it'll, I think, help us with this pick. And then Jags, again, we can kind of look at the AFC after tomorrow and see how many teams are still winless, and then determine if we think they're going to have the Jags start off 0-3 as well. I don't think Buffalo's going to be crazy this year. I really don't. So probably leading Jags upset. Maybe a lot of people are, though. So again, try and see where the money's at, but I don't trust like Vegas Insider or any of those. So we'll have to I just like to gauge the other games in the AFC, and based off how they go, sometimes it helps paint a picture. So yeah, we'll get into those tomorrow. But yeah, I wanted to at least get out tomorrow's picks. And like I said, for the night game, any kind of prop for Bijan Robinson I think will be a good one. I think he's going to have a monster game. And yeah, the Niners makes no sense. I'm loving them to cover the 6.5. Cardinals, loving them to win, because this makes no sense to me. We got the Harbros narrative, so we got a lot going on. And then yeah, as far as the NFC North, I expect that to be pretty tight all year. That's why I kind of picked the way I did with the Titans. Between that and the Lions just looking kind of weird. The Lions, by the way, not Lions. The way the line on the Lions game is also very weird. Just only 3 points makes no sense to me. Even coming off a bad loss, it just doesn't make sense. And yeah, I'd watch out for Caleb. I think they're going to show him, quote, progress. We saw it from week 1 to week 2 where they didn't win, but at least he got something on the board. They got a cover. He was much improved from week 1. So now this could kind of be like an establishment game where he's playing a quarterback that even though it has more games under his belt, people probably look at it as less experienced overall, as far as, just the ability to play in tough situations, because of course all his USC career we've heard how Caleb is on a different level. So I don't think they're going to let Richardson beat him. And again, I think the Bears, it makes sense for them to get a couple wins, maybe get ahead of the Lions Packers, because the Lions Packers, again, they're going to win games down the road, I feel like. And then it'll start setting up when we get Bears Packers, Bears Lions, matchups that actually make sense. Because again, the Bears don't play the Packers for the first time until week 9 or week 10. There's no way they're going to have the Bears sitting at like 3-6 and the Packers at 6-3. It wouldn't make any sense. They're both probably going to be like 4-5 at that point, 5-4. One's going to be 5-4, the other's going to be 4-5. That way, that matchup has a lot of stakes. And then, of course, the second matchup they have, I think, is the last game of the season. And I don't think that's a coincidence at all. So, yeah, I think that's going to help us a lot, kind of seeing what they do with. It's a shame, Packers don't play at 1 and the Bears at 4. Sometimes when that happens, we can reevaluate. But even if the Packers win, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. So, down the road, it might, when it's affecting playoff berths and things like that. And last year, I think I did, last year, because that's how we predicted we were going to get oldest versus youngest with Flacco versus CJ. And the only way that could have happened was the Jags had to lose. And I ran a contingency, because if the Jags didn't lose, there was only on one other scenario in which it could have happened. And the same thing was on the NFC side, in order to get a much better matchup, and it would have been first versus last with the Lions Niners, or it might have been the week before where the Lions played the Bucks. It had to be the Lions had to lose to, I think it was the Vikings they were playing. They had to lose to the Vikings, and if they didn't, then in the following game, I think it might have been the Rams, whoever it was, they had to win. And that's the only way we were able to get the matchup of first versus last. I forget exactly how it worked, but my point is, it was a contingency where if one team won, the only way that the matchup that I thought we were going to get, which we did get, could happen, would be if the in the 4 o'clock game, this other team also won. So we got that. Oh, it was the Rams. I remember, because we got them at I think it was plus 250 or something. They were pretty big dogs, and I think they were playing the Niners, if I'm not mistaken. It was I thought the Vikings, but I think it was the Niners now that I think about it. But it's not that important. My point is, I had a lot of conviction in that, because once the Lions won, which I think they did, the only way that they would have matched up with the Rams, again in the first round, which they did, would have been if the Rams beat the Niners, or I believe that's what it was. And they wound up beating them, and then, of course, we got the most obviously scripted matchups. Hill versus the Chiefs, oldest versus youngest. Every one of these had a narrative, first versus last. And it was pretty, in my opinion, pretty obvious. And I think we had Pittsburgh versus Buffalo, which is, again, where DeMar is from, and then where he plays. There was a ton. So, last year was easy pickings. I think this year is going to be the same down the road. And I think as the season gets going on, we'll get better and better. Again, we didn't have a terrible week last. I think we did 8-6, 9-6 with the Monday game, something like that. And then obviously we're just off to a 1-0 start this week. Probably going to be our best week yet, just because I do like a lot of these matchups. So I do appreciate everybody. I appreciate all the new people too. Again, some are still not convinced that it's rigged, scripted, even though it's sports entertainment. So, I get a few people now and again think that for some reason, for having the unmitigated goal, as that guy Chris Broussard used to like to say, to think that the NFL could be scripted. He must be some kind of believer in every kind of crazy conspiracy in the world. But it's not even a conspiracy at this point. I would say half the fan base knows it's scripted. I can go up to the gas station and casually talk to somebody, ask them if they think the NFL is scripted, and compared to a couple years ago, now the person's more likely to be like, yeah, I think it might be. It's just that obvious. So a lot of new people came over, and it's cool because a lot of people that I didn't see last year, and they're like, "Yeah, this is so freaking ridiculous. It's so obvious. I've been seeing it." And it's cool to see like-minded people. So yeah, I agree. And for the people that don't believe, you can keep watching, and you know, anyone that's been watching the channel for a while knows you just can't make some of these predictions unless it is scripted. They would just be completely wrong. And again, sometimes my picks are off, but the narratives is what I'm talking about as far as like we'll see what happens with the Horror Bros, the NFC North as far as Caleb. Just scores here like the Jets, almost nailed it down to the point just because of how they have established these teams. And it's just like they get ahead of it. They really do. They plant seeds just like wrestling announcers. Then you watch the game and you hear them talking about it all game, and then voila, it happens. Whatever narrative they're trying to force. So yeah, I think we'll have a good week. I really like the 1 o'clock slate, if I'm being honest, but there's some 4 o'clocks I do like. Ravens, Cowboys, Lions, Cardinals, and 49ers, Rams I like. But I really do like Saints here. I really do like the Bears here, Titans, just because a lot of these lines just look a little off to me, if I'm being honest. So here's to a good tomorrow. Take care and happy earnings.